Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa, your headlines on the continent tonight. The Senate President in DR Congo resigns after colleagues file a motion of no confidence against him. He's the latest Kabila-era leader to step out of the picture. Congolese and international rights groups urged the US to reinstate sanctions on Dan Gertler. Last month, the Trump administration eased penalties on the mining tycoon. Eritrea denies being involved in a Tigray conflict in neighbouring Ethiopia. The UN warns that the situation is extremely alarming in the volatile region. But first, the leader of the Democratic Republic of Congo's Senate has quit. Alexis Thambwe-Mwamba resigned after a majority of senators filed a motion of no confidence against him earlier this week. It's another win for President Felix Tshisekedi, as Mwamba was a close associate of his predecessor, Joseph Kabila. The resignation comes just a week after the National Assembly ousted a pro-Kabila Prime Minister and his government. France 24 correspondent Clément Bonnereau has the details.
In a letter addressed to Congolese senators, Alexis Thambwe-Mwamba condemns what he says is a coup against him, accusing petitioners of violating Senate rules and the Congolese constitution. However, he also admits to having lost the confidence of the upper house and says he has no choice but to resign. 64 out of 109 senators had filed a motion of no confidence against him on Tuesday, therefore making his removal almost inevitable. To give you some context, Alexis Thambwe-Mwamba is a key ally of Joseph Kabila, the former Congolese president who maintained a tight grip on power after leaving the presidency in 2019. His political party, the FCC, controlling until recently 2/3 of seats in the National Assembly and the Senate. But in recent weeks, President Felix Tshisekedi has fought hard to sideline his predecessor, and he's been quite successful, convincing an overwhelming majority of MPs to switch allegiance and to topple the Speaker of the National Assembly in December, and also last week to remove the pro-Kabila Prime Minister and his government. The removal of Alexis Thambwe-Mwamba is another victory for President Felix Tshisekedi, who's now free to govern as he pleases and form a new government. And it's all the more significant as the Congolese president prepares to take over the rotating presidency of the African Union this weekend.
Congolese and international rights groups are demanding that Washington reinstate sanctions on Dan Gertler. They accuse the Israeli businessman of obtaining corrupt mining deals in the DR Congo, something the US agreed with. However, just days before leaving office, the Trump administration eased sanctions against him. Now, with a new man in the White House, anti-corruption NGOs are pushing for a reversal of this decision. And one of these organizations joins us on the show tonight. Margot Mollat du Jourdin works on the DR Congo campaign for Global Witness. Thank you for being with us. Now, Margot, what does the current sanctions reprieve mean? Is it business as usual for Gertler today?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me. Yes, indeed. As you said, it has recently emerged that during his last days in office, former President Trump eased sanctions against Dan Gertler. So the US granted him what is called a license, which is basically a yearly exemption that allows him to conduct transactions with American entities. So that means companies, individuals, and banks. This license also allows him to withdraw US funds, which had been frozen until now. So short response is yes, it is somewhat a return to normal. Just to say a little bit also about what this means more broadly and why the reaction was so fierce. Civil society reacted really violently to this and has been absolutely outraged to see this decision for a few reasons. Firstly, it was, according to now publicly information, granted in a way that bypassed interagency processes and was awarded opaquely and in a haste. So in other words, many senior officials seemed to be unaware of this license and were kept in the dark. Secondly, one should note that Gertler's lawyers were very influential individuals with the White House at the time. Namely, Louis Freeh was one of Gertler's lawyers. He's the ex-FBI director, and Alan Dershowitz, who used to be part of Trump's team for the impeachment hearing. I think this significantly undermines efforts in country to fight corruption, despite many risks that different NGOs have been trying to take over the years and risk to their lives.
But Dan Gertler, though, he has promised to be more transparent. A couple of weeks ago, his team announced a project called Yabiso, and it's the chance to offer Congolese people an occasion to invest in his latest mining project. What do you make of that?
Yes, in mid-November, in a very unprecedented pre-recorded video in English, Dan Gertler addressed for the first time his Congolese counterparts in the population, saying that in this new initiative called Yabiso, he would be offering them the opportunity to invest in his business venture, which is basically his business venture is royalty rights for a huge mining project in Congo, and so called Metacool. For most of the international and Congolese civil society, this is quite unconvincing and appears to be a simple PR stunt. Because what people need to understand is that the very revenue stream that he is offering Congolese people to invest in should have belonged to the DRC in the first place. These are royalty rights which technically go back to Gécamine, but those were sold secretly from Gécamine, the state-owned mining company, to Gertler in 2017. And some controversies remain around the opacity and the deal itself. The government, for example, has declared a different price from the one that Gertler has declared. Should also be noted that Gertler holds rights to other huge mining projects, which should technically have stayed with Gécamine. So needless to say that we continue to call for DRC to launch a thorough investigation into Mr. Gertler's business dealings in Congo.
Now, you just mentioned the state mining company Gécamine there. Today, President Felix Tshisekedi replaced some of the leaders. Is this good news?
Yes, we can see that DRC is currently going through an important political shift. So, for example, last week, the parliament voted out the prime minister, and we've seen more recently that they ousted the Senate leader. So this has kind of ripple effects throughout the different institutions, including Gécamine. We have seen changes in management recently. The new director general, who is now close to Tshisekedi, and more recently, other allies of Kabila who have been sidelined. That still leaves us with Albert Yuma, the longtime chairman of Gécamine and a key Kabila ally. So he finds himself really isolated, but we'll have to see, what happens in the coming weeks as Tshisekedi consolidates his power over his new formed government.
And very quickly, I have one last question for you. Your organization is among several, including a dozen Congolese charities, to sign an open letter to the Biden administration. Why is it so important for you to make Gertler an example?
Yes, we are part of a coalition called Congo n'est pas à vendre, Congo is not for sale, which is an international consortium of both Congolese and international organizations fighting corruption in Congo. Gertler is accused by the U.S. Treasury of having caused the government to lose $1.4 billion over just 2 years. So he is, an important example. But moreover, I think that the license that was granted to Gertler in the past weeks is really threatening the integrity of the U.S. sanctions. And it's especially surprising given efforts to push for accountability by international and Congolese organizations. For example, in the summer of 2020, we had published evidence suggesting that Dan Gertler had been using a money laundering network to evade those very sanctions and continue his mining deals. And more recently, a US judge sentenced a hedge fund for corruption in DRC. And while Mr. Gertler was not charged in this case, court documents include information about the alleged role he played, including the way he might have arranged bribes for DRC officials and judges. So it's really important that the Biden administration looks into the way this license was allocated and, if necessary, revokes it.
All right, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Margot Mollat du Jourdin from Global Witness. Well, Authorities in the Central African Republic have extended the state of emergency there for another 6 months. The government spokesman arguing that the legal instrument is necessary as the country is, quote, in a state of war. It means that the military can continue to detain suspects without turning to a prosecutor first. The government has been trying to clamp down on a violent rebellion there. Armed rebels have contested December's election results. More than 200,000 people have fled their homes since the poll. Turning our attention next to the Horn of Africa, Eritrea has denied U.S. accusations that it has troops on the ground in the Tigray conflict. Asmara is a longtime enemy of the fugitive government. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed launched an offensive against regional Tigray forces back in November. Fighting has left thousands of people dead and more than 2 million people displaced. The UN warns of an extremely alarming situation in the region.
The needs observed on the ground are dire and growing for about 2.3 million people. That includes those who needed assistance before the conflict. But access remains, for the most part, limited to people living in the towns along the main roads from the regional capital Mekelle towards Shire, which are controlled by federal government forces. 3 months into the conflict in Tigray in northern Ethiopia, the humanitarian response remains severely constrained and inadequate. And the main reason for that is simply that we cannot reach most of the people in need, and also that we have not received the clearances yet to move the necessary staff into Tigray in the first place.
And finally, a group of scientists has found the smallest reptile on Earth to date, a nano-chameleon. A joint Madagascar and German team found 2 tiny lizards in northern Madagascar. The female reptile measured 29 millimeters from head to tail. The male, meanwhile, came in at just 22 millimeters. That's less than 1 inch. This makes it the smallest of around 11,500 known reptile species. That's it from the Eye on Africa team for now. Stay tuned for more international news coming up on France 24.